Hello, this is Heather Meeker. I'm a lawyer and venture capitalist who specializes in open source software. This quick presentation will help you understand the concept of copyleft, or free software licensing. There are two categories of open source software licenses, permissive and copyleft. The feather on this slide is the logo of the Apache Foundation, which runs many important open source projects that are available under permissive licenses. The GNU is the logo of the Free Software Foundation, which makes available software mostly under copyleft licenses like the GPL. These two types of licenses represent two different but related philosophies: free software and open source software. Permissive licensing is based on the idea that people will contribute to open source projects voluntarily. Copyleft uses a legal device, license conditions, to require people to contribute in certain situations. This presentation is about how copyleft works. Permissive licenses like the BSD license are very easy to understand. They allow you to do anything you like with the software under only one kind of condition, which is that if you distribute the software, you must include a copy of the license. But permissive licenses are just for contrast here. Now let's talk about copyleft. All open source licenses are unrestricted licenses. They grant all of the rights under copyright law. That's one of the requirements of the open source definition. However, they can impose conditions on the exercise of that right. Proprietary licensing, like an end-user license, withholds some rights. Open source licensing doesn't restrict what you can do, but if you decide to do certain things, you must meet some conditions. For copyleft licenses, that means you must share changes to the source code in some conditions. You might have heard some people call copyleft licenses viral. That word makes people draw legal conclusions that scare them, that using GPL software can taint other software. This word was coined by proprietary vendors in the 1990s to try to steal the narrative about free software licensing. It's outdated, inaccurate, and misleading. Let's leave it behind. Copyleft can be boiled down to two conditions. If you distribute the software in binary form, you must make the corresponding source code available to the binary recipients. And you can only license that source code under the terms of the same copyleft license. This applies to the original copyleft software and to any modifications that you make to it to create your binaries. The modifications are necessary so the source code will correspond with the binaries. The purpose of copyleft is to enable recipients to change, improve, and maintain the software if they want to. For that, they need access to the source code. Copyleft comes in a few flavors. The GPL is sometimes called a strong copyleft license because it applies to all the code in a program. LGPL is a license that only applies to libraries of code, which are parts of programs. Most copyleft licenses impose their source code sharing conditions only upon those who distribute binary copies of the source code. A license like GPL, for example, allows you to make private copies and to make changes for your own use with no conditions. But there is another variety of copyleft license, sometimes called an ultra-strong copyleft or network copyleft license. The most common of these is called a Faro GPL. It requires you to share source code changes for software you make available to others via a network, which is often referred to as software as a service or cloud computing. There are a few other so-called weak copyleft licenses, which were written in a more traditional way than GPL or LGPL, and are intended to be straightforward to comply with. These licenses also apply to libraries. They use what is called a file-based copyleft. If you keep proprietary code in a separate file, that's okay. You can distribute the combined program with one portion under proprietary licensing and the other under the weak copyleft license. This slide shows you the most common copyleft licenses arranged from weak to strong. Weak is at the bottom and strong is at the top. So they range from the file-based copyleft licenses like Mozilla, which is the weakest, to LGPL, which is for dynamically linked libraries, to GPL, which is for entire programs, and to AGPL, which is also for entire programs, but imposes source code sharing requirements even if you use the software for SaaS or cloud computing purposes. If you want to know more about the best practices for complying with the various copyleft licenses, take a look at my presentation on open source software licensing basics. If you want to know more about open source software license generally, you might want to take a look at my book, Open Source for Business. You can download a free copy on my website if you follow the instructions in the Links tab. As I mentioned, I'm also a venture capitalist. I work with a fund called OSS Capital that specializes in early-stage commercial open source companies. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. This is Heather Meeker, signing off.